Even as Iran is apologizing to its neighbors and promising that no more attacks will take place in countries like UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, as long as there are no attacks on Iran from these countries, Donald Trump is calling Iran the loser of the Middle East and promising or vowing or threatening that the worst is yet to come. In fact, the exact phrase he used is that Iran is being beaten to hell. But in the meantime, Trump's own economic news isn't great. America has reported a terrible outcome for jobs. The jobs report has not been good news for Donald Trump. And of course, oil prices are surging. Is Trump on the back foot? Is Trump committing a historic blunder? And can anybody pull him back from the brink? In a moment from now, we'll be going live to the United States of America, where Ian Bremmer, one of the world's leading global analysts, will be joining us. In the meantime, scenes like this were dominating the headlines of the UAE as drones from Iran struck near the Dubai airport. In fact, operations had to be suspended for a few hours. Those operations have since resumed. And in fact, Iran's president has apologized to its neighbors and has promised that there will be no further attacks on neighboring countries unless those countries' territories are used for attacks on Iran. The reference, of course, is to American military bases in many of these countries, thereby creating pressure on these countries to ask America to stop using its territory for attacks on Iran. Trump is claiming this apology to be his victory. In a post on Truth Social, Trump is saying that Iran is the big loser of the Middle East and it's going to be hit very hard later today. Now, Trump's economic news isn't great at all. For him, there should be domestic concerns. There's been more reporting on the Epstein files, this time directly naming Trump and allegations involving underage girls. There has been, of course, the jobs report that hasn't brought any relief to Trump, and there are the rising oil prices. What might Trump do next? Can anyone pull him back from the brink? Let's go across now to our newsmaker today. Ian Bremmer is with us, the president of the Eurasia Group, one of the world's leading analysts. Ian, it's always good to see you. He doesn't have an end game. He doesn't have a script. He keeps changing the goalpost of what he wants. Now he says it's not regime change. It's just another leader who's more positively disposed towards Washington and Israel. Do you think Trump is committing one of the biggest mistakes of his presidency, or can this still go well for him?
I think it's unlikely to go well for him. He really believed that this was going to be like Venezuela, open and shut case. In this case, kill the top leadership, but then have people remaining in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps that would be willing to act more pragmatically, engage with him directly, and that there wouldn't be knock-on attacks across the GCC. He wouldn't need to evacuate American citizens from all of those countries, none of which he was prepared for. The Straits of Hormuz would not be disrupted. And it's very clear that he's acting on the fly to respond to things that he did not expect. And yes, he's doubling down. He's toughening his rhetoric. He's expanding his attacks. The expectations now are at least a month of strikes going forward. Of course, that is happening while gas prices in the United States are the highest they've been at any point since Trump took the presidency in either term. It's happening with already 6 Americans that have been killed in these operations, and many more at risk going forward, with Trump increasingly teasing the possibility that U.S. troops may well be used on the ground in some operations in Iran. And of course, also with apparent evidence that the United States inadvertently blew up a school and killed some 150 plus civilians, including an awful lot of little kids. An investigation is ongoing, but the evidence certainly looks that way. None of this is good news for the president. And again, we can tease this out, but my expectation going forward is he's not going to get the outcome he wants, which is doesn't have to be regime change, but some form of an acceptable government to him, an acceptable leadership to him that he'll be prepared to work with. I don't believe that will be the case. And what concerns me, and I think the baseline scenario is that when all is said and done, when the Americans and the Israelis declare that the war is over, and then at that point, a beaten and bloodied Iranian leadership will look vulnerable. The Iranian people will rise up, and they will be killed yet again in large numbers by their own brutal regime. And the Americans this time will not only be on the sidelines, but will also bear some responsibility. That's probably my biggest concern. So I think it's extremely unlikely that this is going to go well for Trump. And I think it's quite plausible that this is the worst foreign policy decision that he's actually made as president.
That's a big statement, the worst foreign policy decision that he's made in his presidency. The problem also is that it has consequences for almost every country around the world. It used to be said of Trump that the one thing he understood was the language of money. When his administration looks at those surging oil prices, when America wakes up to the kind of jobs report that he's had, why is that not enough to make him change his mind?
Well, I mean, it's funny. I could turn that back on you. I think that one of the reasons this isn't going well for him is because the Iranian leadership is not motivated by money and power solely the way that the Venezuelan dictators were and are, the way that many other leaders around the world. He understands, when he's engaging with other leaders that, okay, if they are more powerful and they're more prepared to hit back, then he needs to negotiate like China. And if they're weaker, then he can be much more predatory, like Mexico, for example. But in the case of Iran, it's a fundamentalist theocracy, many of whom are prepared to go down with the ship. And so it's not just about money and power. And that makes it much harder for Trump to find a way to an eventual negotiated settlement. It's not easy to just threaten them into the outcome that he wants. Now, you're right. Oil prices are higher. Gas prices are much higher, though not in the U.S. Natural gas prices are a regional market, and so that's hitting India and Asia, hitting the Europeans, while the U.S. natural gas prices are pretty flat in the last week. But oil prices are up quite substantially, and gas prices, which if you went to his nearly 2-hour State of the Union, he opened it up by talking about how much gas prices were down because of him, because of President Trump. And now Trump has a war that is a war of choice. He chose this war. He didn't need to do it. The timing is completely on him. The targeting is completely on him. The expansiveness of the war is completely on him. And completely because of him, gas prices are higher for Americans. And he has now come out in the last 24 hours and he said, well, I don't care if gas prices go up. This is more important. I assure you, Barkha, Americans do not agree with Trump on that. They actually think that America first means that you first pay attention to the interests of rank and file Americans that are serving in the armed forces, Americans that are standing in line to pump gas for their car, Americans that want jobs and well-paying jobs going forward, all of whom are suffering more on the back of his unilateral decision with the Israelis to go to war. And so, of course, it's not popular in the United States. It's barely popular among Republicans. And the longer this war goes on, the more likely that won't be true as well.
Why is Trump's instinct for political survival not kicking in? The White House is releasing videos of the kind you see on your screen, with some of the filmmakers objecting that war is being treated like a video game. Every politician cares about public opinion, at least the opinion of their own base. Why is Trump's instinct for political survival, which he clearly has, not kicking in here?
Well, you need to ask that question in terms of why he decided to go to war. Because he certainly didn't think this was going to be the outcome, right? I mean, he was coming off of an incredibly successful Venezuela operation. And when I say successful, I mean in every way. No Americans were killed in taking Maduro, who is now not dead. He is now in jail just a few miles from me here in New York City. He has a new leadership, part of the old regime, that is fully prepared to work with him, including in opening up their economy to Western investment in oil, in mining, to having support from the International Monetary Fund. That's going to make the economy work better for Venezuelans. This is popular in the United States. It is popular among populations across South America who have been worried about the instability and lack of security that Venezuela has been exporting to their own countries. It's even led to more support in fighting the drug cartels with Mexico, and as well as with who just killed one of their top drug leaders a week ago, as well as in Ecuador, which has opened to cooperation directly with the United States in the last 48 hours and going after them. So first of all, Trump was incredibly emboldened by how well this went in Venezuela. Now he wants to do it in Iran. Secondly, Trump has had experience with Iran militarily. He ordered the assassination of Qasem Soleimani at the end of his first term. He engaged with the Israelis in the 12-day war last year. Israel started it, but he got involved. Why? Because he saw that the Iranians were unprepared and incapable of striking the United States back, despite all of the harsh rhetoric, despite all of the fire and brimstone that he heard from the mullahs, from the IRGC, from the civilian political leadership. They didn't actually have a fist in their glove. So for that reason as well, he believed that he had Iran's number and that he was going to be able to hit them, and they couldn't do anything. They wouldn't do anything to respond against the United States. So, you know, when you asked me about Trump's perspective of political survival, his decision to make these strikes, which was, you know, considered over several months as he was bringing those additional carrier strike forces, positioning them in the region to ensure that he had adequate defenses. He was increasing the B-2s and others for readiness for all of these different vectors of strikes. Trump believed that he wasn't taking a significant risk. And then in the initial days following his expansive strikes and Israel's expansive strikes, he turned out to be wrong on every count. Well, one thing we know, that an even stronger impulse than Trump's desire for political survival is Trump's inability to ever be wrong about anything. And so, I mean, here it was, Trump seeing all of this news that he doesn't like, and he's doubling down. He's acting to say, okay, well, they're going to have to surrender unconditionally, that I'm going to have to make a decision of who the new leader is going to be. It's unacceptable to be the son of Ali Khamenei, Mustafa, the former supreme leader. I won't tolerate that. But he's not in a position to dictate those outcomes right now, and he may not be in a position to dictate those outcomes going forward. That's why he's suddenly calling some of the leadership of the Kurds in Iraq and saying, well, maybe we need to work with them. Well, that wasn't on the dance card a week ago, but now this is improvising, where in Venezuela, there was no improvising. In Venezuela, there was a plan and everything went according to plan. So, you know, he is in uncharted territory right now. And he's trying to, you know, as they say, make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. It turns out that's hard to do.
Yeah. From an Indian perspective, two things have pissed off Indians, if I may use that word. One is the sinking of an Iranian warship. As it was heading back from India, the ship was part of a ceremonial naval exercise. The sailors on it were cadets. They were not armed. And the ship was sunk by a U.S. Nuclear submarine in the Indian Ocean region off the coast of Sri Lanka. That's one. And the Navy, along with the Sri Lankan Navy, launched search and rescue. Now India has confirmed that at least one Iranian ship has been given refuge by India. Another has been given refuge by Sri
Lanka. Yeah.
Yes. The other thing is this so-called very generous show of quote-unquote permissions and waivers that have been offered to India to purchase Russian oil. Now, this is at one level hilarious because Trump's entire weaponization of tariffs was to impose a penalty on India for the purchase of Russian oil. Now, because of what's happening, the upheaval in the global oil trade, Trump is saying, okay, go ahead, purchase Russian oil. Now, technically, India had actually reduced Russian oil but never stopped it. Even in February, Russia was the highest supplier of crude. Now the government here has given an official statement that we plan to increase the supplies from Russia up to 40% of our oil supplies. Actually, Trump has just had to do a U-turn and Putin has had the last laugh.
Well, you're saying that that's upsetting Indians, the second piece? I'm surprised they'd be upset by
that. No. They're upset by the kind of condescending language being used by US officials about giving us permission. We've given them permission. They can now buy Russian oil. I don't think anybody here loves that language.
And no upset about Modi traveling to Israel and engaging
a lot of debate,
with
a lot of debate, a lot of political heat around that. The opposition has been gunning for the government on that. A lot of discussion on that. The government, I think Israel, an official of Israel went on record to say we did not inform Modi about this strike.
Oh, I'm sure they didn't. Didn't. But it was very obvious to analysts around the world that these strikes were coming, and obviously Modi did not see fit to suspend that travel as a consequence. I mean, he's quite comfortable, generally speaking, with a close relationship with Israel, and that is, irrespective of what we've seen in Gaza over the last 2 years, and irrespective of what we're seeing presently in Iran. So I don't think that bothers Modi in the slightest, frankly. And it's unclear to me that if he had known that strikes were coming directly, it was going to change the way he was going to behave. But leave that aside. I think the fact that the United States is not only now suspending for a period of time their sanctions on the Indians for purchasing Russian crude, which of course was one of the most significant disagreements between the two countries in delaying the U.S.-India trade deal. But it also comes at a time that we've learned that the Russians have been helping Iran in targeting American military bases and other targets with satellite support during the war. So, I mean, the idea that the United States and that President Trump, yes, because he's feeling a squeeze economically, but literally at this moment would make life easier for the Russians, whose budgets have been tight because of sanctions, and now will have an easier time continuing to expand their war against Ukraine. I think that's an embarrassment for the United States and for Trump. I don't think that that's a problem for Modi at all. And I think that he'll take advantage of that, as any leader of India would. I mean, if the Indian opposition was in power, they would happily be purchasing more Russian crude in this environment. I think that's very clear.
Let's go back for a moment to the strike on the girls' school. A lot of reporting in American media now linking it back very clearly to America because there was a naval base next to the school. The images have been absolutely heartbreaking. And this has been one of the inflection points, the mass funerals that we've seen of these girls. And, we're seeing some of them on the screen. How is this playing out in America now that there is actual reporting that the U.S. would have likely been responsible for this carnage?
Of course, demands that the investigation is conducted quickly and that the results are made transparent. There are some in the political opposition in the U.S. that are saying that there should be immediate apologies made at the highest levels from the United States. That has not happened. It is not an inflection point. An inflection point implies that there is a difference in behavior before and after. That none of that, of course, is occurring at all. This was obviously not an intended strike, and many Iranian strikes are intended at civilian targets. So I do think that there is a difference there. But I also recognize that the United States and Israel are overwhelmingly more powerful than Iran. So, Iran is hitting civilian targets because they have very limited drone capabilities and ballistic missile capabilities. They have decentralized permissioning to local commanders who are now hitting whatever they can hit. And that generally means not hardened targets like military targets, critical energy targets, and instead airports, hotels, apartment complexes where civilians are at risk. The United States, with support from Claude AI or support from Palantir, I mean, they have the most advanced weapons in the world, and they're targeting military and political leadership targets and religious leadership targets. But unfortunately, it appears, and for many days, I said nothing about this publicly because it was unclear in the fog of war. I was not prepared to take Iran's word for it, in the same way that I wouldn't take Hamas's word for a lot of what they said in the early days of the Gaza war. But it was very clear on the basis of the targeting that Secretary of Defense Hegseth was showing off, that the Americans were actually bracketing military targets where the school was. And now on top of that, the New York Times forensic investigations makes it quite clear that this was overwhelmingly likely an errant American missile. And as a consequence, you have some 150 plus, and unclear exactly how many of those are students, but a lot of little kids that are dead, that are dead because of these strikes. And again, that are dead because of a war that the Americans chose to engage in. So yes, that blood is on the hands in part of the United States. Not only because, I mean, it is true that the Iranian regime has been building an illegal ballistic missile program that the Security Council of the UN, with Russia and China capable of vetoing, they did not. And so, I mean, this is an illegal program, and the Iranians have continued to build and build. They have supported terrorism around the world. This is a regime that everyone, most importantly, the Iranian people, have suffered greatly under and wanted to go. It's not legitimate in any way. But that is very different from saying, you could have easily imagined a 12-day war that would have focused again only on, in much more limited ways, the military programs, the rebuilding of the nuclear program, the ballistic missile programs, and that would not have led into the intensification, the escalation from Iran across the Gulf and more broadly. It was the United States and Israel that chose to do that. So therefore, the fact that this war has expanded, has escalated, is causing so much more damage and hardship around the region and globally in terms of the economy, that decision is on Trump.
Briefly, Ian, before we let you go, what is your best estimate for how long this might go on? Is there still a chance that Trump may step back, even though his rhetoric doesn't suggest that? What do you predict happening in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, he could decide at any moment that he could end the war and declare victory. There's no view that he's likely to do that in the near term. Everything that I am hearing from the White House is an expectation of at least another 4 weeks of strikes, of military strikes, and that there is no present diplomatic engagement between the U.S. and those that are at the highest levels remaining of Iran's leadership. I think that it might well go well beyond that, and that depends in part on how successful and how lucky the Iranians are in being able to cause more damage. Is there, God forbid, a mass casualty event of Americans, either civilians with terrorist attacks or drone strikes or military? And if that were to happen, the likelihood that Trump would then go scorched earth on Iran more broadly, I think is unfortunately quite high. And then there's the question of, well, what Iran looks like after that. And the most likely outcome is that it is the same regime, just weakened. And then the Iranian people revolt and they get killed in large numbers. And this time around, Trump is seen as partially responsible for that. I think it is possible, but not as likely, that they mishandle their regime succession. They don't have much experience doing it. That the regime starts to crumble, that the theocrats fail, and that the IRGC, some more pragmatic group, is willing to work with the United States. That would be the best possible outcome. I don't think it's the most likely. And one final outcome is that the regime starts to collapse and the country fragments into civil war with the Azeris and with the Kurds and with other groups with different external supporters start taking territory, and that this emerges into a broader regional proxy war with large numbers of refugees and much more potential for spillover more broadly across the region. I think that is relatively unlikely right now, but the longer the war persists, the more likely that outcome becomes.
Well, not one of those outcomes is actually an outcome that will leave large parts of the global economy unimpacted. So
Correct.
All of these are grim outcomes, Ian. It's always a pleasure talking to you, listening from you. Hope to reconnect with you in the coming days as this plays out to the horror, frankly, of most of the world. Thank you, Ian Bremmer,
Bye-bye.
founder and president of the Eurasia Group. Always a pleasure. Take care and see you soon. Bye-bye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.